The same glass of water that protects your kidneys in the morning can overwhelm your heart by evening. Every voice you have heard on the subject pushes in one direction: drink more, as though more were always the safer mistake. Yet hospital wards admit people every year whose only error was drinking the way the advice told them to. One direction of failure thickens your blood until the heart drags it through the small vessels like cold syrup. The other dilutes your sodium until your own cells begin to swell. Between those two failures sits a range your body can handle, and for most of your life that range was generous enough that you never had to think about it. A window with two edges. That window narrowed after 50 because three systems that regulate water changed together. The thirst sensor weakened, the kidneys slowed, and the heart stiffened. How much your body needs is the smaller half of the story. The range it tolerates compressed from both sides at once, while the advice stayed exactly where it had always been. Which raises a question the advice never asks. If both edges of the window have been moving inward for years, where do they sit now, and how close do you drift to one of them on an ordinary day? Water is the medium every chemical reaction in you runs through. Digestion happens in it. Nerve signals travel as charged particles dissolved in it, which makes water the wiring insulation and the wire at once. Heat leaves your body through it, because sweat cools you by the physics of evaporation, each gram of it carrying away over 500 calories of heat as it turns to vapor. And it leaks away constantly through channels you never count. Roughly half a liter a day leaves as vapor on your breath. More seeps invisibly through the skin even when you never sweat. A little departs with digestion. Inside the parched air of an aeroplane cabin, the breath loss roughly doubles, which is part of why long flights so often end in a headache. You are a slowly draining vessel that must be topped up on schedule. Every day. Water even sets your height. Your spinal discs are cushions of it, squeezed flatter by every upright hour and reinflated overnight, which is why you stand measurably taller at breakfast than at dinner. By evening, gravity has pressed roughly a centimeter of water out of your own skeleton. At 30, roughly 60% of your weight was that water. By 70, the figure has drifted down toward half, because muscle, which holds water the way a sponge does, has given ground to fat, which holds very little. Your water compartment shrank while nobody was watching. Here is what the shrinkage does to the arithmetic. A cup of salt stirred into a full bathtub barely registers. Stirred into a half-full tub, the concentration jumps twice as far. Every glass you drink and every hour you go without one now swings the concentration of your blood through a wider arc than the identical behavior produced decades ago. Same habits, smaller tub, bigger swings. Your blood plasma is about 9 parts in 10 water, which means it registers those swings first, and your brain registers them almost as fast. Scans of healthy adults show brain volume shrinking, detectably at a water deficit of only 1 to 2% of body weight, a shift that reverses within hours of drinking. The dull headache and the fog that lift after a glass of water are, in part, your brain changing size, because the shrinking tissue tugs gently on its pain-sensitive coverings, and those coverings complain in the only language they have. So the compartment is smaller, and the swings are wider. What actually happens inside you when the level drops through the low edge? By morning you have gone 7 to 9 hours without a sip, the longest dry stretch your body ever faces, and it faced that stretch lying down, still exhaling vapor with every breath, losing water silently, all night. Deep in the hypothalamus, a small cluster of cells does nothing but taste your blood. When water runs low, the dissolved salts crowd closer together, the blood grows saltier, and these cells physically shrink as water is pulled out of them. Their shrinkage is the alarm. Physiologists call them osmoreceptors, and their signal does two jobs at once. It creates the sensation you experience as thirst, and it releases a hormone that orders the kidneys to hold water back. The hormone has a plain job description. Keep every drop and a formal name. Antidiuretic hormone, which translates literally as against urination, the entire strategy stated in one word. Under its instruction, the kidneys wring the urine down to a dark, concentrated trickle. Darkness in the bowl is that hormone succeeding, the shortage made visible as color. That is the defense of the low edge. It is tidy engineering, and it carries a cost that shows up in your arteries. As plasma volume falls, the blood still carries its full population of red cells, now packed into less fluid. Thicker fluid takes more force to move, so every heartbeat pushes against greater resistance, exactly as a straw fights you harder with a milkshake than with water. The struggle is sharpest in the smallest vessels. Your finest capillaries are actually narrower than a red cell, so each cell must fold to squeeze through single file, and when the plasma around those cells is scarce and crowded, the whole procession slows. Oxygen delivery is a traffic problem before it is anything else. Alongside the first cost rides is second. The platelets, the clotting fragments drifting in that crowded plasma, bump into one another and stick more readily. Overnight, viscosity climbs to its daily peak, which means you wake every single morning of your life with the thickest, stickiest blood you will carry all day. You may even have felt the volume side of this, as the gray half-second on standing up too quickly, a circulation momentarily short of fluid to lift against gravity. Laboratories see it too. The fasting blood drawn at 8 in the morning is drawn from a concentrated version of you, and several of its readings shift with nothing more than the hour of the draw. Something about that morning peak is worth keeping in hand. It returns later, attached to a clock, because the low edge is only one of the window's two boundaries, and the other is guarded by an organ with a speed limit almost nobody has told you about. Your kidneys can only excrete water so fast. In a healthy young adult, the ceiling sits close to a liter every hour. Below that pace, any surplus simply leaves as pale urine. Beyond it, the overflow has nowhere to go. It stays in the blood, and it begins to dilute the one mineral your cells refuse to negotiate over. Sodium sits dissolved in the fluid, bathing every cell you own, held there by deliberate, expensive work. A molecular pump embedded in every cell membrane spends a large share of your resting energy pushing sodium out and holding it out, hour after hour, because the voltage across each membrane, the charge that lets a nerve fire and a muscle contract, depends on that separation. Flood the body with water faster than the drain can clear it, and the sodium you own stays constant while the water around it multiplies. The concentration falls anyway, through pure dilution, with every pump still running perfectly. Once the level slips below about 135 millimoles per liter, a blunter physics takes over. Water always migrates toward the saltier side of a membrane, and now the saltier side is the inside of your cells. They swell. Most tissues have room to bulge. Your brain sits inside a rigid box of bone with no spare room at all. A swelling brain pressing against the skull produces headache, nausea, confusion, weakness, and when sodium falls far enough, toward 120, seizures and coma. Physicians call the condition hyponatremia, and it is why marathon runners have collapsed after races during which they drank at every station, conscientiously, exactly as told. Their sweat had carried salt out for hours while their bottles carried only solvent back in, so every refill replaced the water and deepened the dilution, an arithmetic that holds for anyone working hard in heat with nothing but plain water at hand. There is a strangeness here worth a moment of quiet, the substance from the kitchen tap, the one thing you were told could do you nothing but good, undoing a runner in front of a first aid tent. Speed decides much of the danger. A brain given days of slowly falling sodium quietly sheds dissolved particles from its own cells to reduce the pull drawing water in, an adaptation that buys tolerance. A brain hit with a change over a few hours has no time to adapt. That asymmetry turns out to matter enormously for when you drink, and it comes back later in the story. There is no alarm for too much. Thirst guards the low edge, late or early, well or badly. The high edge is guarded by the drain alone, running at its fixed pace, backed by your lifelong faith that water is the one substance safe at any dose. Both edges are now drawn. Still missing is the machinery that decides how much error you can afford between them, and it sits in your chest. So what does a surplus of water actually ask of a heart? Absorbed water enters the bloodstream, so blood volume rises, and more blood returns to the heart with every cycle. Physiologists call that incoming load the preload, and a young heart handles a rising preload with engineering so tidy it reads like a design brief. The more its chambers are stretched by incoming volume, the more forcefully they snap back, the way a rubber band flung from a deeper stretch flies harder. Stretch in, force out, automatically. The arrangement is known as the Frank-Starling mechanism, and it is the reason a healthy 30-year-old can drink far past sensible and feel nothing worse than repeated trips down the hall. There is a buffer upstream of the heart as well. Most of your blood at any moment sits in the veins, vessels built to slacken and store, and a compliant venous tree soaks up part of any surplus before the heart ever meets it. The reason a blood donation, a sudden half-liter withdrawal, passes almost unnoticed. Youth, in other words, defends the high edge twice, once in the veins and once in the chamber. That mechanism has one requirement. The chamber has to be able to stretch. An older left ventricle is a stiffer one, for reasons still being withheld a little longer, and a stiff chamber answers extra volume with rising pressure instead of deeper filling. Pressure in a closed circuit has to go somewhere, so it backs up the line into the veins returning from the lungs. The blood vessels threading the lungs are built for gentle pressures, and their contents are held inside partly by the plasma's own proteins, which act like microscopic sponges keeping water in the vessel. Push the backed-up pressure past the grip of those sponges, and water weeps out of the capillaries into the air sacs themselves. Every breath must then pull oxygen through a film of fluid. Charts record that flooded state as pulmonary edema. The person living it knows it as night breathing turned into labor. Breathing becomes work. Ankles pull what the circulation cannot lift. This is how a person ends up in a hospital bed overnight, short of breath, having done nothing all day but follow instructions. And here is the uncomfortable truth inside that story. The instructions were probably right for the person they were written for. A physician telling one patient to push fluids is protecting failing kidneys or heading off a repeat of dehydration. The identical volume handed to a different body, one with a stiffer ventricle and a slower drain, becomes a load the system cannot clear. A number that saves one person overwhelms another. Two identical prescriptions, two different machines, two different outcomes. The dose was only ever safe relative to the machinery receiving it. Well, the first time I worked through that hourly arithmetic against my own habits, I moved the tall glass I used to empty at bedtime into the middle of my afternoon, and it has stayed there since. Two edges then, and both of them able to put you in hospital. You now know what each one does to you. From here, the question changes from what the edges do to why both of them spent the last few decades moving inward while you paid attention to neither. And that answer comes in three parts, each of them a system you have already watched working at full strength. What follows is what the decades did to each one. First, the alarm on the low edge. Those tasting cells in the hypothalamus lose sensitivity with age, so the saltiness required to trigger genuine thirst climbs. The concentration at which an older brain finally registers the urge sits measurably above the level that sets a 30-year-old reaching for a glass, a threshold shift, Begg charted in the journal Physiology and Behavior. Plainly put, you can stand at a deficit that would have nagged you constantly in middle age and feel nothing at all. Waiting for thirst after 60 is waiting for a smoke detector that has learned to sleep through the first hour of the fire. Worse, the alarm stands down too soon. Thirst switches off within seconds of swallowing, long before any water reaches the blood, because sensors in the throat meter the volume passing and reported forward, an advance on repayment the brain accepts on trust. In an older body, that early shutoff still fires on schedule against a deficit that has grown larger, so drinking stops with the debt only part paid. Begg's review gathered the behavioral half of the picture as well. When young and old volunteers are deprived of water and then offered a pitcher, the older ones reliably pour less and quit sooner, just when their measured need is greater. Meanwhile, the kidney compounds the problem from its own end, because its answer to the hold water hormone weakens too. The hormone still arrives, often in greater amounts than in youth, but the aged kidney concentrates urine less deeply in response, the way a radio with a worn speaker plays the signal it receives ever more faintly. Water that should have been kept is let go. The alarm fires late, and the order it finally sends is carried out incompletely. A quieter loss amplifies the dosing. The muscle that departed over those years took its water with it, and muscle was the body's holding tank, the reserve that once covered a missed afternoon of drinking without the blood feeling it. The tank shrank alongside the alarm, so the low edge arrives in fewer dry hours than it used to, and announces itself later when it does. The low edge moved inward because its guard dozes. Now the high edge. The kidney's filtering units, around 1 million tiny sieves per kidney at their peak, drop out of service steadily across adulthood and are never replaced. Filtration falls by roughly 1% a year from around age 40, a slope Lindemann followed through decades of repeated measurements in one cohort of aging men, published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society. The decline varies from person to person, gentler in those spared high blood pressure and diabetes, steeper in those carrying either, but the direction is one way. There is an energy story underneath the plumbing story, too. Moving water and salt back out of the forming urine is active pumping, work built in cellular fuel, and the machinery that generates that fuel produces less of it each decade, so the tubules doing the pumping run their shifts undersupplied. By 70, the drain that once cleared nearly a liter an hour may manage 500 or 600 milliliters, and less on certain medications. Every glass now stands in a longer queue. An afternoon of drinking that a younger kidney dispatched in real time becomes a backlog the evening inherits. Now, you have already met this decline, in the dark, without its name. The hold water hormone is supposed to run on a daily rhythm, rising at night so that sleep can proceed uninterrupted while the kidneys idle. With age, that rhythm flattens, the nighttime rise thins out, and urine production migrates into the hours it was engineered to avoid. The 2 in the morning walk to the bathroom is the flattened rhythm made visible. Each of those trips also exports water in the middle of the night's driest hours, digging the morning trough deeper still, one system's decline feeding the others. The high edge moved inward because its drain narrowed, and between those two edges once stood a buffer that absorbed every hour-to-hour error you made in either direction, the compliant heart. Its stiffening, promised earlier, has a specific chemistry. Glucose circulating in your blood bonds, slowly and permanently, to the long collagen proteins woven through the ventricular wall, and those sugar bridges weld neighboring fibers together, cross-link by cross-link, decade after decade. This is the cross-linking chemistry already at work in your arteries, in the lens of your eye, in the discs of your spine, and it firms the storage veins along the way, so both of youth's volume buffers drain at once, and in the heart it converts a stretchy chamber into a firm one. A change in ultrasound can watch as the chamber filling more slowly in the moments it should be relaxing. The engineering that turned extra volume into extra force now turns extra volume into extra pressure. The margin for error, the slack that quietly forgave the skipped bottle and the late-night liter alike, has been welded out of the wall. 3 changes, running in parallel through those identical decades, a thirst signal arriving later and answered more weakly, an excretion rate sliding downward year on year, and a ventricle trading stretch for stiffness through accumulating sugar bonds, until the window that once spanned a comfortable daily range has drawn in from the bottom, drawn in from the top, and lost the cushion between. Nothing hurt while it happened. You drank from the familiar glass at the familiar sink, and the physics on the far side of your skin quietly rewrote itself around the habit. 30 years of mornings, 30 years of evenings, and the glass never once felt different in the hand. Each edge keeps office hours. A narrowed window would matter less if your drifting toward its edges were random, and it turns out to keep a schedule instead. So when, across an ordinary day, does each edge come closest? Morning belongs to the low edge. The overnight dry stretch, deepened by every nighttime bathroom trip, delivers you to dawn at peak viscosity, and waking layers a second load on top. The cortisol awakening response, the hormone surge that arrives with opening your eyes, lifts blood pressure and heart rate within the first hour. Thick, sticky blood meeting a freshly accelerated circulation is one reason the hours between 6 and 10 in the morning carry the day's highest rates of heart attack and stroke. Hydration is a single term in that grim equation, the viscosity term, and it happens to be sitting at its worst value at the very hour the other terms surge. Winter raises the stakes further, in a way almost nobody connects to water at all. Heated indoor air is desert dry, and the drier the air, the steeper the gradient pulling vapor off your breath and skin, so the overnight loss runs heavier through the very months when the tall cold glass holds the least appeal. Deep winter mornings find the trough at its deepest. Evening belongs to the high edge, and it recruits an accomplice you would never suspect. Gravity. Whatever the slow drain has yet to clear from the day is still on board when you lie down. And lying down performs a plumbing trick, returning the blood that pooled in your legs all afternoon back toward the chest, raising the preload at the precise hour a stiff ventricle tolerates at least. Then comes the common habit of noticing at 9 in the evening that barely any water has gone down all day, and repairing the total with a full liter before bed. Given what speed does to a diluting brain, that bedtime leader lands at the back of a long queue, ahead of a night of reduced kidney output in a body lying flat. A healthy 50-year-old carries buffer enough to absorb it. A body with a stiffened heart or slowed kidneys meets its narrowest hour at its narrowest edge, and breathlessness in the small hours, or sock lines pressed deep into swollen ankles, is the window announcing it was overrun. Part of what a stiff-hearted body processes overnight is yesterday's ankle fluid. Once the legs come level with the heart, the water that seeped into them across the afternoon drains back into the circulation over several hours, arriving as yet more volume after midnight, and yet another reason sleep gets interrupted by the bathroom or by air hunger. Anyone living with heart or kidney disease or taking water tablets, the medicines that push the kidneys to shed salt and fluid, has a window drawn individually by their physician, and that drawn line outranks any general figure, including every figure here. An evening glass of wine deserves its own line in this ledger, because alcohol chemically suppresses the hold water hormone. The liquid goes in, the hormone that would have kept it goes quiet, and the kidneys shed more than the glass contained. Drinking toward the dry edge is possible after all, and it is scheduled by habit for the far end of the day. Every heat wave runs the whole system as a stress test, and this is why late summer death tolls skew so hard toward older adults. Cooling demands sweat by the liter, the dozing alarm undercalls the loss, the weakened concentrating response wastes what remains, and the deficit builds for days behind a face that reports feeling fine. The window does its narrowing silently over decades, and then a single hot week walks a body straight out the bottom of the window. Morning risk is scarcity meeting a surge. Evening risk is surplus meeting a wall. And if the danger depends this heavily on the hour and the machinery, what remains of the one-size answer you were promised, the famous daily total? History answers that bluntly. The famous total began life as a guess. Traced back through the literature, it simply dissolves, as Valtin combed the physiology archives in the American Journal of Physiology and reported that no experiment had ever produced the number. Actual need moves with body size, activity, air temperature, kidney function, cardiac function, and medication, which is to say it moves with the person and with the day. It even arrives partly through the kitchen, since something like a fifth of daily water comes packaged inside food and fruit and soup and vegetables, uncounted by any glass tally. Coffee, long accused of draining you, mostly acquits itself on measurement. Caffeine nudges the kidneys mildly, and the water in the cup outweighs the nudge, so the morning mug counts toward the day rather than against it. The placement of that mug is more interesting than its verdict, because fluid taken in the first waking hour lands directly on the day's deepest deficit, thinning the day's thickest blood at the hour it matters most. And then, your body publishes its own figure, updated hourly, in a place you already look. Urine color is the concentration readout of the system you have just learned. Pale straw means intake and excretion are balanced inside the window. Dark amber means the keep every drop hormone is straining against a shortage, the low edge approaching. Water running through colorless means the kidneys are shedding an excess, the high edge approaching, a signal deserving respect from a drain that has lost pace, whatever the wellness posters once made of perfectly clear urine. The gauge reads a shade high on the days a multivitamin tints it, and honestly on most others, which is a better calibration record than thirst can claim after 60. One system in this whole story escaped the aging, the one you can read. Timing, meanwhile, matters more than the total, because the drain has a rate, and rates care about pace. An identical daily volume can live entirely inside the window when it arrives as small amounts spread across the waking hours, each cleared before the next lands, or it can breach the high edge when it lands as one large evening pour against a slowed drain and a horizontal body. The window is crossed by floods and respected by streams. All the advice ran in one direction: more water, always more. The physics runs in two directions. Too little, and the blood thickens, the brain contracts, and the morning risk sharpens. Too much, and the sodium dilutes, the stiffened ventricle meets a volume it can no longer stretch around, and fluid backs toward the lungs. The safe range between the two is the window, and it drew inward from either side at once. The guard at the bottom dozed, the drain at the top tightened, and the pump between them lost the stretch that used to absorb the error. welded by the same cross-linking chemistry that aged the arteries and the lenses and the discs. You were told to drink more. The range the body tolerates changed, without the advice changing with it. The water was never the problem. The window was.